weekend of the 2023 Oscars, so today I'm going to stop and rank all 10 Best Picture nominees from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all 10 Best Picture nominees. My list is not the right list. It's just my list, and I would love to see yours. One quick announcement. Later this month, I have 2 live events coming up. I'm going to be at Fan Expo Cleveland, leading a couple of panels with John Flickinger as well as Austin Burke, and then I'm going to be at MegaCon at the end of the month with 5 other full-time YouTubers. I'll have details on that in the near future, and let's get started. In last place, Tar. For me, this movie took way too long to get where it was going and had far too little payoff. It seemed to spend way too much time on the details and not enough time explaining the actual plot and everything that was happening. I mean, it starts off with like a 15-minute long interview where we get all sorts of explanations on her thoughts on music, which are kind of relevant to her character and the plot, but actual plot points that are major shifts in what's taking place are handled in such a subtle fashion that it's so easy to miss so many details about what's going on in the film, and not in an interesting, compelling way that makes you want to rewatch the film to catch everything that you miss, just in the sort of way of like, why didn't you explain that better? You need to slow down so I could actually follow what was happening with these characters. And a lot of that is that it's just diving deep into this world that I'm just not very interested in, and certainly don't feel the need to learn this much information about this world of high art. There's other scenes in there that just feel like they're treating characters like stereotypes. The BIPOC scene where she's teaching the class and just talks down to the kid. He's written like a stereotype of the fragile person on Twitter. He's not written like a real character. Everything he says just sounds like a superficial cliche of a group of people. So this movie did not connect with me. I didn't get anything out of it. I don't get it. Great performance, but I don't get it. Number 9, women talking. When it comes to film, typically the rule of thumb is show, don't tell. As the title of this movie would suggest, it is a lot of women talking about the events that led to the film rather than showing the events. And so we're not really given the context to fully even understand what they've been through. We just kind of get a montage of how they've suffered, and then it's discussing hierarchies, patriarchy, and oppressive states, things like that, and how they should respond to it, and seeing each of their different perspectives.
Hope for the unknown is good. It is better than hatred of the familiar.
But without getting a bigger grasp of the context of all of it, it wasn't something that I felt really explored the interesting ideas present in the events of the film. And what I mean by that is that, how did a Mennonite society devolved into essentially a rape cult where every man is complicit and involved in some sense, or they're backing every other man in the group, whether they were overtly involved or not? How did people that have the same Bible that I have, I've got 30 Bibles in that movie room right over there, how did they read the same Bible as me and come to the idea that they have to put the burden of forgiveness on the women while being overtly forgiving towards the men who are rapists? Like, how did they devolve to that place? And the movie never really dives into that. I mean, it talks about how the men in a certain sense are victims of the structure themselves, and they've been raised in this environment that's they talk about it in this broad sense, but without really seeing it, diving into it, it's just all top level discussion of the most interesting stuff because it doesn't have room to have that greater discussion. And I wonder if even some of that is that it's a story about a people of faith in a faith-based community, and it's a story about spiritual abuse as the men are hoarding their faith over the women to force them to comply and forgive and to fall in line. That's spiritual abuse. but the story, as my understanding, was written and directed by someone who is an outspoken atheist, in which case there's a certain distance between the people of the story and the person telling the story, in which case it can kind of only comes up at this top level rather than having some shared worldview with any of the characters in the story, because she doesn't. I could be wrong on that. What I read was that she's not a person of faith. Therefore, she has no common ground to understand what's going on in these groups. And I felt some of that. Like, there's a gap between what my understanding of like how this would be laid out as a person of faith from what I'm seeing in the story. So for me, it played very much just kind of like a superficial parable discussing things without diving into the specifics of what makes this story in particular interesting. Because it's based off real events that happened in Bolivia in a Mennonite community 20 years ago. And I'm fascinated by that. I didn't feel like this story captured that. Next up, Triangle of Sadness. I actually saw this film as the closing night movie at Fantastic Fest back in September. I went in having not seen a trailer. All I knew was the title of the movie, the screenshot on their website, which was of a woman vomiting. And as we walked in, they gave us vomit bags. That's all I knew going into the film. To state the obvious, that's an interesting concept to go into a movie that's being praised as an awards contender, and in this context is actually a Best Picture nominee. So the movie itself, a lot of it I really enjoyed and found fascinating, of kind of this exploration of power structures, elites, their cluelessness. Parts of it could be very funny at times, and in particular, the shipwreck sequence with all the vomiting got so outrageous that it was quite funny. But it's also a movie for me that just way overstayed its welcome, and it ran out of gas about 30 minutes before the end. And some of that's like supposed to be kind of the structure of the story with the different acts and its very distinct ways in which it presents the characters, presents who's in power. And then we get to the third act where everything's turned on its head as they end up on this island. But it also just felt a lot like we're still going. Like, it didn't have enough oomph for me to get to the end of the movie. And so it's like, okay, I get your point. Right. Gotcha. All right. We're still doing this, still going. And some of it felt kind of forced for me. And so another movie where I enjoyed it more than the bottom two films on this list. There were a couple ideas and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But for the most part, it's also a movie where it's like, I don't really get what others were getting out of this film. This did not come together for me as a cohesive whole. Number 7, Banshees of Inisherin. This is another movie that I saw at Fantastic Fest without any point of reference, without knowing anything about the movie. I haven't even seen the previous films from the director, in which case I signed up to watch this film basically because other people are like, oh, you want to check this one out because it's from this director. It's going to be really cool. Colin Farrell's. And I was like, oh, cool. Sure, I'll sign up to watch it. So check this one out. Going in totally cold. And this is a movie that I certainly enjoyed a lot more than the bottom two films on this list, as well as got more out of it than I did Triangle of Sadness, and felt that it came together as a whole. But also, like kind of those bottom three films, it's not the kind of movie that's entirely on my wavelength for how I'm wired. And so still there's a lot of ways in which I'm like, I don't get what a lot of other people are seeing in this film. It's a fascinating exploration of this friendship that falls apart and different worldviews and perspectives on things, and how different people have different ambitions, and that leads them to different places. And all the kinds of things are fascinating, fantastic acting, beautiful scenery, fun, interesting dialogue, where it's very much a dialogue-driven film, and it keeps you paying attention and invested in everything taking place. And at the same time, it's a movie where I don't watch a movie like this and think, wow, masterpiece, best of the year. Like, oh, that was good. That was interesting. That was kind of a neat little exploration of something. Simple little story about people with, really complex layers to the simple story taking place. Oh, that's cool. I don't at all think, wow, best picture material. I just don't see it. I'm not wired that way. That's why I'm not normally someone that discusses prestige films a lot, because it's just not really my thing. Then we have All Quiet on the Western Front, and this was the last of the Best Picture nominees that I watched. I actually watched it last night, and it's a fairly one-note but effective exploration of how pointless and brutal war can be. In particular, its depiction of the just horrific sacrifices that are made for absolutely no reason. Whether it's just a petty decision or a war that had just led to no significant changes. And especially as you even get to the final cards and it discusses how many people died in World War I, 17 million, while most of it was battling over just a few hundred meters or a few hundred yards of land, going back and forth just a little bit, and millions of lives were lost. And even as the movie kind of depicts, even if you survived, there was a horrific toll that it took on you and what it pushed you to do and to experience and to see. And it just kind of makes you just pause and think about man's inhumanity to man and how we can be so cruel and dehumanize other people in ways just to survive, just to get through the moment. And it's so easy for us, like I'm sitting comfortably in a room talking about movies for a living. I have a very comfortable life. And there's so many people now and all throughout history who have been just through these just shocking realities that I can't fathom. And this is kind of a movie that puts you in a time and a place and takes this event or this war that read about in books, and sometimes it's not as much romanticized in movies as World War II can sometimes be, but it just shows you there was nothing romantic, nothing exciting, nothing thrilling about war, specifically World War I in this context. It was, even as you're watching these astounding battle sequences, they're not exciting. They're just horrific. And you get this like just sinking feeling in your gut the whole movie of like, you're just waiting for the next awful thing to happen. And even as there's good news, you're like, I know it's not going to stay. Something else terrible is going to happen. And so it kind of just stays on that one note the whole movie, but it's very effective at hitting that one note. Bringing us into the top 5, Elvis. And if All Quiet on the Western Front kind of hit this one note of despair from beginning to end, Elvis kind of covers the full spectrum of emotion. You see the rise to fame, you see the controversy, the comeback, the tragic finale, everything in between, all with Baz Luhrmann's like hyperactive directorial editing style, where this thing is just bursting with life. And especially to be on this list side by side with All Quiet on the Western Front, just kind of shows you how different movies can be and still do great things. And so I went into this movie actually very reluctant. I almost didn't go see it because it is such a long film. It was a busy season of life. I went to take my kids to go see the Minions movie at a press screening. I went the wrong day. I wrote the wrong date on my calendar. So I'd scheduled a night to go see a movie and went, all right, we missed the Minions. I guess I'll take the kids home and I'll go see Elvis. And luckily I did, because I really enjoyed this film. Austin Butler absolutely captures Elvis. And for a historic figure that we've seen so many impressions of, he's actually able to embody him. You see the actual character, not an impersonation, not Austin Butler. You see the character of Elvis in this film come to life in all the different renditions of the youthful, innocent version of him, all the way to the tragic downfall at the very end where he's just, it's gut-wrenching to see him in that state. It gets all of it. It was a little bit weird the way that it used Tom Hanks's character as kind of this framing device. I wasn't crazy about that. I kind of get it, but wasn't crazy about it. But in general, I thought that this was a very good or excellent portrayal of Elvis's life that really took me on a whirlwind of emotions. Number 4, Avatar: The Way of Water. James Cameron's one of my absolute favorite directors. And I would say that of the real James Cameron films, the first Avatar is probably my least favorite of his films. It's a technical wonder. It's actually quite an effective experience watching the movie, but the story's a little bit too familiar. As many people have said over the last 13 years, it's Dances with Wolves, Ferngully, Last Samurai, Pocahontas. It's that classic tried and true formula just set on Pandora. And I was wondering, like, can he do it again? Can he make another movie that sucks you into this world, even with a fairly straightforward story? And he did it. He pulled it off.
You did. You crazy son of a bitch, you did.
There's something about the way that he does these Avatar films to where they're truly unique cinematic experiences. They're movies that demand to be seen on the biggest screen possible in 3D, and I don't even like 3D, with incredible sound. And I would say this is a better film than the first Avatar. It has a story that breaks from a simple kind of formula that the previous one used. But it's still really much more about what he's able to do and just sucking you into this world, where the movie has a lot in common with kind of those old IMAX documentaries where they were designed to just kind of like take you to forests or under the water, and you're just immersed in these worlds that are actually on Earth. And that is the experience that James Cameron does with the Avatar movies, except he's taking us to Pandora and their big action spectacles with these very primal emotions about family and protecting your children, youthful rebellion, just these universal experiences, universal emotions that have very broad appeal, filmed in a way that just has this sucks you into this world. I rewatched the movie just a couple weeks back, and you get to the middle of the movie where normally there's kind of that lull in energy, and the way that he brings it to life is by doing all of these just astounding underwater sequences where you're just learning about this made-up world as if it's a real place that we can experience with just this photorealistic visual effects where you cannot tell the difference between live action and computer generated. And so while it's still a fairly simplistic story, James Cameron is the person in 2022 that delivered the movie that demanded that you see it on a big screen. So for me, I think you just have to have that movie in your top 10, top 5 of the year. If he's the guy that made the film you have to see on the big screen in that year. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all of the Best Picture nominees that you have seen. Also, this is a ranking of the Best Picture nominees, but if you want to hear my picks for the 10 best movies of 2022, you can check out that video right up here. Those are the movies that made me love movies the most last year. Check it out. In third place, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And what I loved about this movie was its ability to have kind of this art house aesthetic, get very weird, cerebral, and trippy at times, while also being entertaining and incredibly accessible. Of all the movies on this list, it's probably the one that balances the art and the entertainment the best, of really doing some trippy, weird stuff, but also finding ways to constantly pull it back to something that's easily accessible, while also touching on broadly accessible human experiences of, as you go through life, you ponder what could have been, what might have been, what should have been. You have all of those thoughts, and it finds a way to use this currently trendy topic, the multiverse, to tell a story exploring kind of that midlife crisis of sorts. But it's not just a story about a midlife crisis. It's not just an art house film. It's also a comedy. It's a martial arts movie. It's a horror film. There's like almost like zombie apocalypse type stuff in there. It's all of it all at once, kind of as the title says. And that's what made this movie really special. For me, I thought maybe it went a little too long, repeated a few ideas a couple times too many. Otherwise, fantastic film. Our runner-up, The Fabelmans, the semi-autobiographical film about Steven Spielberg's childhood that kind of combines this family drama with a coming-of-age story, all intertwined with this celebration of films and how they're able to move us. And it kind of seamlessly transitions through all of those events by having the pseudo Steven Spielberg as our center character in the middle of all this family drama as he's growing up. And the thing that kind of centers him, the thing that pulls him through all of this is that love for film.
You stop making movies, it'll break your mother's heart.
And his discovery of how he can use stories tell stories through film to move people emotionally, and all the little tricks of film that can make them more effective. And I just thought it pulled together, once again, all these different elements so effectively. And while doing something that pretty easily can veer into pretentious category where like we're telling a movie about celebrating film in order to be celebrated as great film, it easily can veer into that category, but it found a way to consistently deliver humor, little laughs throughout the film, very personal moments, so it's not just on a heady level. It always goes back to the characters and the journey that they're on. And so it, for me, moved at a nice brisk pace, touched on a lot of emotions, kept me entertained. And I just loved the way that it was able to show the audience all the tricks of cinema, not all the tricks, a bunch of the tricks of cinema, how movies can move us in a way that was through story, not just preaching at us, lecturing at us, or anything like that. So I just loved this film. But of course, coming in at number one for me is Top Gun Maverick, a movie that I was excited for years. It was on my most anticipated list for like 4 years straight because it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed because Tom Cruise wanted this movie to release in theaters at a point in time where people would actually go out and see it. And so I ended up seeing this movie 4 times the week that it opened up, and I would have gone to go see it a 5th time that week. It is that rewatchable. It is that enjoyable. It is that effective as a film. And sure, it's a classic blockbuster, that it's a crowd pleaser. It's entertaining. It's filled with action and humor, but it's also just kind of a great story about someone getting older and realizing their place in this world is shifting, and noticing that as they get older, they're not sure exactly what their place is in this world. And they did all of this while not feeling the need to humiliate or deconstruct Maverick. They made him older and more mature, but if anything, they made him even more of a legend in this movie than he was in the original Top Gun. They only elevated the character. And while doing so, they also told a story about the person that was Pete Mitchell, Maverick. And I thought they did such a great job of it. In addition to that, they literally spent years developing new cameras and new technology to be able to put these cameras in the cockpits of these jets.
Working with the Navy, 15 months to figure out how to get the cameras in these things.
They took the time to train the actors to be able to go up in the jets. They trained the actors on how to run the cameras, do their own makeup, do their own like cinematography and everything, because while they're up in the jets, they couldn't hear from anyone. The cameras couldn't be operated by anyone else. And they spent the time to get everything right to be able to capture the most thrilling aerial sequences that we have ever seen in a film, all while telling a story about actual characters that you care about, coming to such a satisfying, enjoyable conclusion.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
This, to me, was the best theatrical experience that I had in 2022. And then I rewatched it in the theater a bunch of other times, and it was awesome every other time. And I've rewatched it at home so many more times. This is the movie that made me love movies the most in 2022. So not only is it my favorite of the Best Picture nominees, it was just my favorite movie of 2022 in general. So of course it comes in at number 1. So that's my ranking of the Best Picture nominees, but you can see my picks for the top 10 best movies of the year right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.